Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. It's always a wonderful opportunity to come your way and bring you these programs. They're either a broadcast, podcast, or video cast, depending upon how you are listening and or taking in this information. We hope that you will do so. As we open up the doors, so to speak, to our very special guest here on the program, Yashinsky Chute, and she has written a book, and it's rather interesting because we deal with this on a regular basis, especially when talking about the material world, and that happens to be family. And she's written a book called What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. Ellen, thank you so much for being with us. I'm actually rather intrigued because from my perspective, coming from a large family, there are a lot of dynamics there. And something tells me that there is a certain element of putting on different masks depending upon which parent and or sibling you're dealing with. And in those dealings, you learn how to put on different masks for other people who are sort of expressing the same kind of personality trait of your siblings and or your parents.
That is absolutely correct. I use the metaphor of a car to show the impact of our family dynamics. I appreciate you very much having me on your podcast, and I hope to be able to answer questions and help people understand how using the metaphor of the car can be a very helpful way to get to understand ourselves more.
I think one of the aspects of that metaphor might be starting with the fuel, and what is it that you put into, well, again, the metaphor of the car, that drives us and makes us who we are. My father, now I didn't drive until I was 38. I was legally blind from birth. But my father always told me, says, because he never knew whether I would marry a woman who would drive and what have you, always take care of the basics. Do the basic, change the oil, lube, and filter every 3,000 to 5,000 miles or whatever the engine manufacturer. Make sure the air pressure in the tire, just the basic, simple things. As I like to say, take care of the details, because then you don't have to take care of the big stuff if you take care of the details. So what is it about an individual in a family? What are the little things that we should be taking care of? And if there are young people that are listening that are still living at home, that will help us to become the people that we will become, and maybe as I talk about even in my book Choices, allow us to make the choices to become the person we want to be and not the person we will become because of these external stimuli.
Well, that is exactly the reason that I wrote this book, was so that we could understand ourselves better and make our lives more intentional rather than just things that we learned by rote and we never really thought through and possibly aren't serving us any longer. Let me explain the metaphor of the car in a way that might help you understand the little details to be maybe different than you expected them to be. I use the metaphor of a car because if you think about a car and that inside the car, there's a driver of the car, there's a passenger of the car, there may be other passengers, children in the back seat or way back seat, or other people in the car. And if we think about a car as a family, what is a family's goal? A family's goal is to take this group of people from today to tomorrow to the next day. And this group of people is like a system. And if you can think of a system of gears, how if you turn one gear, all the other gears turn, a car or a family is exactly the same way. So I am using systems thinking to describe how each member of a family has their place to sit in the car, has their label in the car. All cars have rules. And the way that the car gets these people from today to tomorrow to the next day and into the future, ultimately releasing the children in the future, hopefully, is because everybody has a role to play and plays their role dutifully in the car. Now, that happens without anybody really being conscious of it. It just happens. It's part of systems theory. When one gear moves, another gear, all the gears move.
Mm-hmm.
And so the car requires everyone to respond to the actions in the car, the dynamics in the car, and people are hardwired to follow along, especially when they're small children. So when I ask someone, the first question I ask someone is, if you think about your car when you were growing up, some people had an actual car, some people don't have a car, but we're just using the metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you say is in the driver's seat?
No, usually the
So
parents.
most, yes, usually the parents, right? Um, I get some interesting answers to that question. And and the answers that I get to that question supply me with some of the little details that you were speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask somebody who was in the driver's seat of your car while you were growing up, and they think for a minute and then they say, well, I would say it was my mom. And I would say, it was your dad also in the car? And they would say, yes, my dad was in the car. And where was your dad's seat in the car? And some people say, well, my dad thought he was in the driver's seat, but my mom really was in charge of what happened in the car. So my dad was really in the trunk. Or, yes, there was a dad in our family, but I don't even remember him in our car. Or my dad sits in the driver's seat. And then I would say, was your mom in the car with you? And they would say, yes. And I would say, what was your mom's role in the car? And they would tell me, well, she told my dad what to do in the driver's seat. So, so it gives you a picture when you know that mom is sitting next to dad and telling dad what to do, and dad's just doing what mom tells you. That tells me so much about their family. That
Mm.
dad maybe was more passive, that mom was the one that sort of ran the show and had the rules, and people needed to abide by that.
Mm.
So those are things that when I tell people to describe their families to me, they don't generally say things like that.
Mm.
Or I ask people after those questions, then I ask, where was your seat in the car? So my husband, who is the youngest of five boys, and I am going to tell you my car stories,
Okay.
but my husband was the youngest of five boys, and the older four were a group, and then there was 7 years, and then him. So I asked him where was his seat in his car growing up, and he said, well, we had one of those old station wagons, and my older brothers were all sort of lumped in the front with my parents, and I was all by myself in the back seat. But in those days, the back seats were facing backwards out of the car, out of the back of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband, I asked him what his role was in that seat. And he said, well, my role was that I just felt out of the group and I was alone in the back. And the way that I entertained myself was by trying to wave and make friends with people who were in cars around me.
Mm. Interesting.
Now, if you would meet my husband now, you would recognize that. You would, because he would be very forward about coming and not necessarily waving his hand, but trying to make friends with you and getting to know you and being very friendly.
Mm.
And so when you understand that that was his role in his car and that he's still doing it, some many, many, many years later, that is a very powerful influence.
Mm. We are having a really interesting conversation with Ellen Chute and her book, which I hope you'll get a copy of. What drives you? The website that we want to send people to. Where would we send them? I know it's available on Amazon, but if they wanted to find out more
Yes.
about you and the work you're doing, as well as ordering a copy of your book, where would we send them?
Yes. So you would send them to Ellen, Chute.com.
And we will be linked to that website as well so that people can find out more about you and the work you're doing and get a copy of What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a pleasure to have Ellen Chute with us here on the program to sort of dive into the dynamics within a family that makes us who we are as individuals. Matter of fact, as you were talking about the parents there, the one thing that came to my mind was a decision I made, and I was in high school at the time, and this one evening, and my mother and father both went back to junior college to get their respective degrees. My father in computer programming, and my mother in nursing, and I needed to. Um, I had a paper route. I was a paper boy, and I said, "No, I have to go collect." Well, that night was the night of my mother's graduation, and I did not go. And I think I might have even bicycled near the college, near the field. Um, Even though I was out trying to collect money for the paper route, I thought, maybe I should at least, swing by. And I don't think that, and I know it did not go over well, especially with my father, who
Mhm.
the one message regarding my mother that he gave all of us was, don't you ever forget her birthday or Mother's Day, or you're going to hear from me. And we didn't.
Mm.
But he was not an abusive person by any means, but he was certainly stern in that he wanted us to show due respect to my mother. And then, of course, I have four sisters. One of them has passed, but nonetheless, it was growing up. So, you've got that, and then one brother, a younger brother. But I was usually away from home from I don't know, I guess eighth grade, because that's when I really started delivering papers, and then all through high school. And so I managed to find myself away from the family.
Mm.
I have to wonder if that particular dynamic, my choosing to be away from the family, uh, had a major impact on. I mean, they had to fill the void, so to speak. They had to adapt to my absence, and then all of a sudden I show up, and oh, he's back again. I would venture that that probably is something that for me. I mean, I don't know. And I make friends easily too. I mean, I'll go into a room of strangers and I'm introducing myself and I'm saying hello and hey, how are you? And what are you doing here? And so on and so on and so on. So kind of like what you were describing as your husband is doing.
Hmm.
When you see these different attributes in adults, you're able to pinpoint the way in which they were influenced by the family members, and not necessarily specifically how many siblings they had or what have you, or even if they had two parents and on and on and on. And does it make any difference if the parents were same sex or opposite sex? I'm curious about that. Let me ask you about that in terms of the family dynamic. Does that really make any difference? Or does one of the adults take the role of father, the other the mother in that respect? Or is it
So
extremely individual? How does that work out?
it, a family is any group of people who have a commitment to each other, who go through life together, who have who have a commitment to being together and traveling that road of life together. It
Mm,
does not matter the gender of the parents. It does not matter. Some of the most functional families I've worked with, the mom and the dad, or the two moms or the two dads, they when you ask who sits in the driver's seat, they'll say, well, we both do. It depends on what we're doing. Because if we're doing something like this, then that person's in the driver's seat. If we're doing something like that, then that person's in the driver's seat. And that happens with same-sex couples as well as it happens with, heterosexual couples.
hmm
It's just two different people living in the car. I think more important about that is the messages that the children get about gender roles, who does what in a family. Those are very, very important messages that are transmitted through the car, oftentimes, um, you know, covertly without words.
hmm
But we learn all that through the car.
Yeah.
Yes, and no, it does not matter.
Yeah.
What matters most in the car is how the children in the car are viewed. And now let me tell you my story about my car growing up,
Okay.
because that's
Please.
really where this all originated from. So my parents met in college in Pennsylvania, and they got married, and then World War II happened. And my father was drafted into or I don't know if he was drafted or I think everybody signed up then for the army. He was an engineer and he was sent somewhere away from us. And my mother was, they were living at the time in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. And my mother got a job working at Aberdeen Proving Grounds doing design for airplanes and stuff like that, as part of the war effort. And following the war, my dad came home and my parents moved to Detroit area where I'm from, and they had me as a child. And so I was born into a car where there was a father who was driving and a mother who was the passenger, and I was in the back seat as the only child, as a baby.
hmm
When I was 18 months old, my parents decided to divorce, which was unusual at that time. And my father moved away and left my mother and I in the car. So at 18 months old, the driver of the car, who I had known for 18 months, was suddenly gone. My mother now became the driver. And as children in divorce often do, I became the metaphorical passenger in the front seat with her.
Mm-hmm.
Because very often a child steps into the place of the missing parent. And my mother and I were a team until I was 7 years old. And then my mother remarried. And once again, my car changed so that my new father, my stepfather, was in the driver's seat of the car. My mother was in the passenger seat of the car. And I was in the back seat.
Mm.
So if that gives you some idea that very early on in my life, I was faced with losing someone who I had known since birth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no amount of talking to an 18-month-old baby that's
Mm-mm.
going to help them to come to understand that. It's
Yeah.
just this person is gone. He moved out of state. So I had very infrequent contact with him. And at that time, they really thought it was better just to let the child be with the mother, and she'll get a new father at some point, which I did when my mother remarried.
Yeah.
So that when I talk about my car growing up, it is that car of my mother and her second husband, who ultimately adopted me. Um, and I view him as my father. Now, every car has its roles and its rules. So my role in the car, and this was made very clear to me, it was not a covert role, was that I was supposed to be a pretty little girl who sat nicely with a smile on her face and didn't say much, didn't have needs, didn't speak up really, and that my job in the car was to just be in the back seat and kind of be quiet, not cause
Mm.
anybody any trouble. And the rule in our car was that little girls are to be seen and not heard. Okay. So if you remember, I had already lost a father, and now I finally got this car back with a father and a mother and me in the back seat. And I was going to follow that rule very specifically because I didn't want to lose another driver of my car.
Mm.
So I grew up in this car with my stepfather, who became my real father. And as I said, the rule in the car was that I was supposed to look pretty and be quiet. And I was very good at that. Now, I was a, it turned out that I was an only child. I was an only child when my parents got married. My mother tried to have more children and had a series of miscarriages and eventually gave up on having more children. So I spent my life alone in the back seat of this car, realistically and metaphorically. I was alone in the back seat. I was always by myself back there. I didn't have siblings back there with me. Coincidentally, my parents were both also only children, which means that not only didn't I have siblings, but I didn't have close aunts or uncles or cousins who seemed like family to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very kind of solitary existence. We had lots of friends, and I had friends, and I lived in a community, a very friendly community where I grew up. But nonetheless, I was the only child alone in the back seat of my car growing up. Now, the rules of my car, really, the one major rule of my car, which was not spoken, was we try not to upset mom.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So my father was in the driver's seat, my mother was in the passenger seat, but my mother was one of those people who told my father what to do continuously.
Yeah.
And everything really needed to be what she wanted. She was directing him. And I knew that rule that we try not to upset mom, not because anybody told me, but because I learned at a very young age when mom gets upset, life is not good.
Mm.
She yells and she would spank me and um, all kinds of stuff. And so I learned early on in that context to be quiet, to look pretty, and to have a smile on my face in
Hmm.
order for things to feel okay to me. Life felt safer when I did that.
Okay.
So that that's a very, very powerful process to teach a child not to use their voice, not
Mm.
to speak up, not to demand attention, and to look pretty, especially a girl. That's a very powerful message.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the message I learned. I I benefited a lot from that experience because I learned to do things myself. I learned not to rely on anybody to come and rescue me. I learned to be very independent. I learned to take care of what I needed to. I learned how to manipulate people so that they would be less angry because anger didn't sit well with me.
Mm.
And I took all of that learning into my adult life.
Mm. I'm curious as to how you have adjusted yourself, to realizing that, okay, I'm an adult now, and that may or may not continue to work, but it's not serving me as the individual. I may be getting what I want, but it really, inside, I'm sure it was like things are just a little off here. I need to take an inner look at self.
Yes. So life teaches us if we're willing to listen to what life teaches us. So I got married. I grew up. I went to college. I got married pretty quickly out of college. My friends, we were all getting married then. There were 8 weddings of ours that same summer, immediately after college. Um, And I married someone and entered into that marriage being that same person who used to sit in the back seat. And so I learned, I took my learning with me. I
Mm.
didn't speak up much. I didn't have a voice. Anything this person wanted, I would have done for him. I would, because that's just what I learned to do. And it was unfortunate for me because life eventually taught me that you need to have a voice, that you have to be able to speak up, that you have to be able to speak and tell the truth and have a relationship with someone, even when they're mad at you and even
Hmm.
when they're pouting, and to still be able to tolerate that.
Yeah.
But I was not able to do any of that in that marriage, and that marriage failed because of that.
Mm.
Yes.
It's interesting because we can now use not just the information that you have gleaned and put together in this book, what drives you, but we can take a look at the adults around us, both near and far, including various leaders in corporations, educational institutions, coaches, presidents, congressmen, senators, parliament members, and the list goes on of because I've often asked this question. It was actually one of those questions of four that I had to ask myself at one point a few years back, because I was I was in a situation where it's like I can't live like this anymore. I cannot allow myself to continue to be dragged down this road, and so forth. And so the first thing I had to do was I had to acknowledge, thank you, teacher, the other person, for teaching me how not to be. It's not the way I want to live. I don't like the drama either. Then the second one was, I forgive you, but more importantly, I forgive myself for allowing myself to be dragged into this quagmire, the drama. But it's the third step that, to me, really helped, and then it ties into what we're talking about here. And that third step is, what is it that you are so afraid of that makes you be the way that you are? This almost, some people would say, no, it's not, but I would say it's almost antisocial behavior on a national level. Okay. What is it that I'm not asking you to change, but, and I'm doing my utmost not to pass judgment. I just want to understand, just as you have put together in your book, what drives you, to help us to understand. There is no judgment there. There is no, well, this person grew up this way and that was bad, and this person grew up this way and that was good. It's neither. It's neutral, because it's just your observations and the way you're processing them. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is your experience.
Yeah.
We all learn to some degree maladaptive coping mechanisms to
Yeah.
deal with what we
Yeah.
have to deal with when we're children. We
Mm-hmm.
all do. And some maladaptive coping mechanisms are easier to morph into something more adaptive. And some maladaptive coping mechanisms stay with us forever
Yeah.
unless we intentionally try to change them.
Mm-hmm.
And now the problem that people have is they're not able to look objectively at themselves and say, whoa, I need to figure this out. I don't want to keep making the same mistake.
Yeah.
Some people instead blame the people around them for what's wrong in their lives.
Hello.
Some people just some people just become very solitary and isolate, even though they're married and have children and everything. They
Yeah.
really are not connected to anyone, and that's just a maladaptive safety mechanism.
Mm.
So we all develop those. The purpose of my book is to come to understand that about yourself and say, oh my gosh, of course that's what I do. I look how I was taught that. How would I wouldn't have any way of understanding not to have those reactions. But
Yeah.
once we understand with compassion for ourselves and not just be mad at ourselves because this is what we're doing and it doesn't work, then we have the option to change.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you that as much as I have changed my entire adult life, whether being a therapist or teaching social work students for 23 years,
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it, are all places where I have to have a voice. When, as a therapist,
Yeah.
people come to me and want me to have a voice.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I have to have a voice.
All right.
So I put myself in places where I can not only be heard, but also appreciated for that voice, which I was never appreciated for my voice when I was little. It
Yeah.
was always, that always meant I was acting up or acting out or
Mm-hmm.
not following the rules.
Yeah.
So, and so the point of my book is really to understand that it is nobody's fault how you turned out. It's not your parents' fault. It's not your childhood perceptions' fault.
Right.
It just is what it
It
is.
is what it
And at
is.
any
Yeah.
stage, right, and at any stage in life, we can examine our behaviors and decide, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore. And I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
try to change it. Now, I will tell you that there are still many places I have a hard time getting my voice, mostly in in very deep interpersonal relationships. I still don't like making somebody mad. I will not confront anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It just it terrifies me to my core to have somebody be mad. I think it always will. But I have made substantial enough strides with my voice, with asking others for help, with so many things
Hmm.
that at some point you just have to say, okay, this is never going to be where I want it. And guess what? I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's good enough. I am good enough.
Hmm.
Yes.
It's interesting because someone asked me some time ago, a friend of
I'm
mine is, well,
sorry.
why won't you fight for me? You know? And I said, I don't want to fight with you. I don't even want to fight, period. I just, it's like, um, some people want you to take up arms, so to speak, and get in the fight with them, join the battle,
Yes.
whatever it is. And I just, for example, my brother, younger brother, and I, following the night following my sister's memorial, we sat in my parents' dining room, and we started talking. And of course, I knew right away from the words he was using and so forth that he and I were on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Immediately inside myself, I said, no matter where this conversation ends, and I think it went on for 2 or 3 hours,
Mm,
he will always be my brother, and I will always love him and be proud of him for what he has accomplished in his life, what he has done. I think primarily of he worked for Disney and he worked for the different amusement centers around the world, and he was able. And there's nothing but pride in my heart for him for doing this, not envy. He took my parents on a trip, a vacation to China, where they had
mm.
pictures up on the Great Wall and so forth. So, you know, he and I, both have every right to believe, to support, to position ourselves wherever we want, because that's what makes us who we are. And I will tell you at the end of that conversation, and it was really funny the way it ended, because my mother came out of the bedroom and said, boys, he's in his late 50s. I'm six, and I was in my 60s. Boys, um, it's almost 1 o'clock. And I said, well, we're just about finished. But when we ended the conversation, we agreed that there were three things that needed to be taken care of. Okay. We didn't necessarily agree on how, but we agreed there were three things that, we agreed upon. Hooray. Oh my gosh. How fantastic. And of course we kind of left it at that and moved on and so forth. And, I think that the way people have responded in this country over the last 15, 20 years to the differences, quite honestly, that is appalling. That you would place your religious or political views over family? Really? Do you know that in the
Well,
military, they are looking out for not just themselves, but each other? Leave no man behind. All right, I've got your six, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they all may have different political and religious views. Doesn't matter. They are part of a unit and they work together to accomplish whatever the mission happens to be. And I thought that was interesting. You said that the purpose or the mission of a family. I never even thought about there being a mission or a purpose for a family other than having kids and then they grow up and then they have kids and they grow up and so forth. I'm fascinated by that.
yes. So this group of people get together, okay?
Hmm.
And they all go to sleep at night and they all get up in the morning, day after day after day.
Yeah.
And because we're human beings, we go through periods of development, physiological development. And this group is together when when there are babies, when there are toddlers, when there are school age kids, when there are teenagers, and now even young adults are back in the car.
Hmm.
Okay. And this family has to adjust to all these different developmental stages that happen all together.
Yeah.
And families have styles of interacting with each other. And I'm going to tell you there's four main types of family interactions.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you about the four. And I think, and we're going to allude to how your brother and you could have a talk for that long and have different beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
and why in many families that cannot happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's four basic ways that families interact with each other. The first one I call the disconnected or the chaotic family. In the chaotic family, no one is really ever in the driver's seat. This family gets up in the morning, they put out the fires they need to attend to that day. There's no kind of long-term goals in this family. That everybody just does what they're supposed to during the day. When things come up, they deal with it, and then they just move on to the next day. The children in a disconnected family learn to be very independent and to take care of things themselves, but they also don't get the love, support, affection, listening, caring of a parent on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the parents might be present emotionally, but sometimes they're not. Um, think about a family that has addiction or that has a severe mental illness. Sometimes other things take over and the children are just kind of left to fend for themselves. This is what I call the chaotic or disconnected family.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this in families that are at poverty level, and I've seen this in families where both parents are hardworking, high level, highly paid professionals. So income has nothing to do with chaos in a family.
Mm-hmm.
The next family I want to talk about is what I call the controlled family. The exact opposite of the chaotic family. In the controlled family, there is a person in charge, and that person makes the rules for everybody in the family, knows how things are supposed to be, and makes determinations as to what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. And this is how things are going to run here. In the controlled family, there is a person that controls everything about the family. They control the minds of the children in the family. We are supposed to think this way, and we are supposed to do things this way, and everything is regimented. And there's not room in a controlled family for someone to say, but I don't like it that way, or, well, I think it should be different. In a controlled family, you do what you're told, and you don't develop your own thoughts, beliefs, feelings.
Yeah.
You learn family think, and that is it.
Mm-hmm.
The next kind of family I want to talk about, and this is the kind of family I grew up in, is the perfect family. In the perfect family, it could be either of the parents who are in the driver's seat, but in the perfect family, everyone does exactly what they should. Now, what they should is dependent on their community, their religion, their belief system, their family history. Everybody has their own family shoulds. And in the family of shoulds, you do what you should because that's what makes you a good human. Now, if you don't happen to believe the same should that your parents believe, you're out of luck because your parents determine the shoulds. So in my family growing up, the shoulds were that, as I said, the little girls are supposed to look a certain way, a lot of shoulds about appearances and how people looked, and if we were graceful, and if we were well spoken, and if we were educated, and every family has their list of shoulds. The problem in the perfect family is that if everybody is operating according to what they should be doing, nobody is developing a self. Everybody's only being compliant. And I work with many people in my practice of my generation that grew up in should families who don't even know what they feel, who don't even know what they want, because no one ever listened to it or honored it or was interested in how they felt or what they wanted. And so it's a task as an adult coming to discover who you really are and what you really think about things and how you really feel. Because in today's society, you need to be able to know those things about yourself to make good choices for yourself. The final family is what I call the real family. And the real family is messy. The real family tolerates everybody's thoughts, opinions, feelings. The real family doesn't decide what a child should grow up to be. In the real family, the child is empowered to learn about lots of things and figure out what they want to be. In a real family, a teenager can come out as gay and be accepted in that family. In the should family, unless shoulds are okay, that wouldn't happen.
You're right.
The real family is about the ability to express real emotions, to have a structure that is flexible according to the needs of each member, not according to one controller and how they think it should be.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to look at their families and think about the dynamics. The reason why you and your brother could sit for 3 hours and talk, being on opposite sides of this divided world, is because that must have been encouraged in your family, that you accept each other, even if you aren't necessarily what the other person agrees with.
Yeah.
There must have been tolerance in your family, or the two of you could not do that.
Yeah.
And I believe,
Mhm.
yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say I
Oh,
would I would transpose that word from tolerance to acceptance. Tolerance implies I will tolerate you, judgment, whereas I
yes,
accept my brother I accept my brother totally for for who he is. I guess is the best way to summarize it, for who he is.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think that in this country, up until 10 years ago or so, we were tolerant. Nobody, I mean, people may have had stakes in an election, but not like what has just happened.
Yeah.
Not like that. We
Yeah.
were able to understand, okay, so that person will be in charge for a while, and then that person will be in charge for a while.
Hmm.
And it was a much more accepting and less frightening situation.
Yeah.
For kids who grow up in families where they felt unprotected, where they felt like they had to be out for themselves or no one was going to get anything for them, they are going to have a hard time accepting others. They are just looking out for themselves, for their needs, and it's very hard to be relational from that place.
We are talking with Ellen Chute, and we're talking about her latest work, What Drives You? The question. I hope that you will pick up a copy of her book at her website. Her website happens to be, by the way, Ellen Y. Chute, that's ELLEN, the letter Y, CHUTE.com will be linked to that website so that you can find out more about her and the work that she is doing. And we'll talk more with her as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and this is a fascinating conversation, Ellen. I am always fascinated by these conversations, and to your point about, especially about, being who you want to be. My parents. And it was shared with us, obviously, over the years. I had a wonderful opportunity back in 2015 to actually interview the two of them on this program. And we talked for like an hour and a half, which kind of pushed the limit a little bit, but they acquiesced. And we talked about all kinds of things. But the most important thing, advice that my father ever gave me, was Richard, find something you love to do. You're going to be doing it for a long time. My father passed at the age of 91. he he had several different jobs in his lifetime. In particularly, as I was a kid growing up, he worked in a print shop where they printed checks, and they had the offset presses and all that stuff. Took me on a tour once. It was really very cool. Then when they moved the plant to Utah, he didn't want to move the family, so he obviously left that company and went back to school, got his computer programming degree in the 70s when they used lots of fan fold paper and punch cards. So we had lots of drawing
Mm.
stuff. And he continued on from there. And we even worked together on certain computer projects to the extent that in '94, I started building them. I had to get over
Mm.
my fear that there was this red button of self-destruct somewhere on this keyboard, and I was
Yeah.
afraid I would hit it and destroy the thing. When I finally realized that it didn't exist, I didn't have any problem after that, and I literally was building them from the ground up, and it was really a blast. And my father and we would talk about it, and I would help him doing. He would transfer music from albums and CDs to his computer, and then he would process them using the sound editing software that I was using. I gave that to him, and we just had a fantastic time. But I, it was like I didn't really have to take his advice per se because I was kind of already in it in 1979, and but I stuck to it. I did change from different jobs during the early 80s and 90s. But for the most part, it was radio, it was broadcasting. But I never thought I was wasting my time in those other non-radio, non-broadcasting occupations. But he was very clear about that, and I think he told all of us that find something you love doing because you're going to be doing it for a long time. Well, my brother, who's younger than me, he's already retired. I don't know what's up with that, but that's fine with me. He can spend the rest of his life traveling between the U.S. and Vietnam. He apparently loves it there, and so forth. I myself, I love this. I love doing the stuff that I do. I'm now ostensibly running a radio station that I've been working for 18 years. Uh,
Wow.
it was sold to a corporation that basically said, keep doing what you're doing. And my boss, he basically turned the reins over to me as of this conversation last week.
Wow.
When I asked him about a particular thing that I wanted to do for the station, because I felt it was appropriate to check with him, he says, "Well, that's your call." I said, "What? No, that's your call. You go, you decide." And so it's like it opened up the doors for me to be able to make some minor tweaking. Nothing major. Not going to do rap polka or anything like that. We're going to continue with what we're doing. But I
Can I
find,
say something?
sure,
Can I
please do.
say something
Jump
about
in,
that?
please. Yes.
So it's wonderful that opportunity came to you and that you were able to embrace it. And in order for that to happen, you had to come from a family that allowed you to believe that you could,
Hmm.
you got to, you got to be successful. You got to do things that were hard and scary, and that you were going to make things work out for you.
Hmm.
If you had come from a family that didn't tell you that, that only told you that you were lazy and stupid and you're not as good as your brother or your cousin, when those opportunities would have come up for you,
Hmm.
you might have thought to yourself, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't do that." And
Well,
that's the kind of knowledge that my book helped
yeah.
people with,
I,
because your parents didn't intend for you to not think you could,
hmm.
but you gleaned that you didn't get to in your family. And
Yeah.
now you're still using it to keep yourself from becoming your
Yeah.
best self. And
And
so
I've,
you're not.
yeah. And I've still had
Right.
those moments. I mean, fleeting moments
Of course.
of doubt going, I don't know if I can.
There's
Two,
nobody who
yeah,
doesn't have doubt.
yeah. 3 years ago, I auditioned for a group here in Santa Barbara called the Santa Barbara Revels. And throughout the year,
Mm.
they do different things, but specifically at Christmas time, they put on this performance. And it's song and dance, and it's acting, and all these different things. And I was thinking, well, I mean, everybody says I'd be great at it. Now, okay, I'll take the plunge. Let's just see where it goes. And it was last year's performance. I did it the year before, but last year's performance that really was extremely impactful for me. Now, I'm not going to necessarily become an actor, but I'm not going to say never, never. But there was a scene that I was in where I was interacting with the other actor on stage. And I was so into that moment that we were in, that we were supposed to be living in, and so forth. I started to cry. I almost couldn't get the lines out because
Mm.
I mean, I was like, wow, is this what this is like? And I was actually,
I'm happy that you could take the chance
yeah,
and feel that and feel
oh,
that.
it was,
That's
yeah,
what we can do when we
yeah,
know ourselves, and we can have compassion for ourselves and say to ourselves, go ahead, we're just going to try it. We'll
yeah,
figure it out. We'll figure
yeah.
it out.
And, and,
That's
and,
what my book is all about.
and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You found out that, okay, that's not your thing. Or
And you,
when I finished my book,
yes.
got it published, and I sent a copy to my mother. She sent me a text applauding me for, congratulating me for number one, writing the book, finishing it, and everything. But she says, I learned things about you I always wanted to know.
Mm,
And I thought, wow, okay, I need to stay in contact with this woman because if there's more she wants to know. I just thought that was pretty cool. Um,
it
uh,
is. It's
uh,
very cool.
and I know that you're doing the same thing. Now you are also a clinical social worker, uh,
Yes, I'm a therapist.
a therapist. Okay.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
so how long does it take for you? And I don't know, maybe there's a survey that you have your clients fill out, but how long does it take for you to put this individual into one of those four categories, saying, they came from number one or number two or number three or number four? Does it take you very long? Is it pretty easy to spot as you're sitting and talking with them?
Yes, it is. But I've been doing this for 30 years
Yeah.
with this. Yes. So I can pretty much tell a lot of things right away.
Any
Yes.
surprises in that regard? Can someone come from a multiplicity of those, a combination of those four?
Absolutely. And most families are a
Hmm.
combination of those four,
Hmm.
but it's the one that's most prominent and the one that has the largest effect on us personally. And it could feel different to a sibling. It's
Hmm.
just us.
Yeah.
That's what we're interested in. It's our experience, what we the assumptions that we made about ourselves, about our family members, and about life as a whole when we were small children that we still hold on to. That's what it's about.
Well, what I find interesting is that uh, I think I'm correct. You will guide me through this. I'm from a messy family because,
Yes, right. It
yeah,
sounds like it.
yeah,
You're from we call it the real
yeah.
family.
I mean, I take a
Yep.
look at my brother and my sisters and our growing up and the things they did. I chuckle about my eldest sister who has since passed, and she had asthma as a child. And as she grew up, she became involved in music. And I chuckle about this because, the question that comes up, who does that? The woman has asthma, and what instrument does she choose to play? The French horn.
Uh-huh.
But then I learned from either my mother or my sister, oh, that actually helped her lungs to function better.
Right.
And then she
And
actually,
somebody gave her permission.
yeah, she
Even with
became,
asthma, you get to.
yeah, she became second chair of the Scottsdale Symphony Orchestra back in probably the early 2000s, which I thought was amazing, just amazing. Yes. it's amazing to me. Go ahead.
Yes. Um, I have to go in
Well, then we will
it's
wrap here and ask you the three final
okay.
questions that we always ask our guests before we go. And I thank you so much for giving
Great.
so much time. This was fabulous. The first of those three questions is, who is Ellen Yashinsky Choate?
Shoot.
Chute, I beg your pardon. Ellen
Yeah.
Yashinsky
Shoot.
Chute.
Yes. I am a woman, a mother, a grandmother, a wife. I am a therapist. I do psychotherapy with lots of people. I'm an educator, and I'm an author.
Mm. What gets you up in the morning?
Gratefulness.
Mm. And finally, what was your best day?
Um, I I I have many, but my most recent best day was Thanksgiving with all of my children and grandchildren together for the whole day,
Mm.
watching the Detroit Lions play football and having a wonderful, wonderful day together. That was my best day.
Well, I will tell you, I've had a wonderful time here with you today, and I thank you so much for this opportunity to not only get to know you, but also the work that you are doing to help people uh, to uh, uh, to find themselves, to learn about who they are. And thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. To my friend Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.